Great to see you here again. Now we are looking at the second video of the webinar presentation, and we are looking here again at communication management. Now, when we look at the project manager, it's very important that the project manager understands how to listen to what the people are saying. Now, when we look at listening, we have to look at two types of listening, which we call active and effective listening. And these two elements the project manager really have to understand. Active listening is when the listener, the receiver, tries to understand the message of the sender as clearly as possible. Effective listening is when the receiver tries to understand the perspective of the speaker and empathize with the person. Now, both skills enable the project manager to understand the interest of every stakeholder and how to align these interests to achieve the goals and objectives of the project. Now, what's the problem with listening effectively? Although all courses explain the importance of effective listening, many people still are not able to do so. The main reason is that most of the people only see the world from their own perspective or in one dimension. They cannot imagine what the other person is experiencing. Now, the inability to listen with both sides of the brain causes miscommunication, misinterpretation, and miscalculation. The left side of the brain typically emphasizes facts, logic, discipline, and precision, while the right side of the brain emphasizes emotions and sensory perceptions. And those two sides of the brain have to cooperate together to have effective listening. Now, what are the 4 steps for effective and active listening? In order to listen well, it's important that the project manager or any person who wants to listen actively and effectively performs the following 4 actions. They have to hear what the person is saying. They have to clarify what has been said. They have to interpret the message, and they have to respond to the message. These are 4 important elements that have to be managed, that have to be done in the order like we have it here. If we don't do this properly, then we always will have problems with communication. Now, when we look at communications, we also talk about the communications management plan. And communications are very important, and we have to describe how and what we are going to communicate with the people. The communication plan is not talking about the techniques, the communications that we are going to do, although it's very important to understand active and effective listening. Now, here we look at the communication goals. What do we want to communicate? What are the objectives? And what are the requirements of the project? And basically, the plan assigns responsibilities, defines formats of messages, quantity of the messages, quality, content, and timing. The communication plan basically has 2 purposes. The first purpose is to acquire the right information and send it to the right people in the right format at the right time. And the second purpose is to ensure that the communications process occurs and it's sustained throughout the project life. It's very important to keep communication going. Communication should never stop and should continue through the life cycle of the project. What are the characteristics of the plan? Well, it depends on the complexity and the size of the project. When we have a more complex or a larger project, the plan becomes more important, and that's evident so. It has a clear, easy to understand structure and a language. The content is limited to what is necessary. It is comprehensive and provides adequate coverage of information for people to contribute toward achieving the overall vision of the project. It's available and accessible by all people in the project and all the people who are participating in the communications process. The people who will use it should buy off on the document and understand the principles described in it. So you have to agree that everything is understood, that you agree with the principles, and that you are aware how to deal with, or how to communicate according to the communication plan. What is the structure and the content? First, we have to have a purpose. What is the purpose of the plan? We have to have the scope of the plan. There have to be clear objectives. There have to be overall constraints. There is also a table addressing different points. First of all, the approach. What are the goals? Who are the participants? What are the medium? What is the medium or the different media that you're going to use? There has to be an agenda. There has to be responsibilities. Who is going to do what? Who is going to send out the agenda? Who is making the reports? Things like that. There is a frequency and time. When will we meet? What is the time that we will meet? It's preferred to fix this on a permanent basis so that everybody really knows that's the time. They can put it in the agenda and people know when they have to be there. There have to be equipment and supplies. What are we going to use if we want to have electronic communication? Of course, we need materials to do this, subscription of Zoom, for example, cameras, microphones, things like that. There has to be linkage. How do we link the people? What are the constraints to the plan? Some additional comments. And these are the elements that should be there in the plan. Now, in some cases, it's also important to have an issue management plan, and we have to look at issues. Issues will happen, and we should not put them aside. Issues have to be addressed properly. Now, when we have issues or problems that surface during the execution of the project, we have to have a structure to deal with them. It's very important that we know when there is an issue, how can we deal with it? And it's also part of communication management because issues can relate to communication problems. Now, when we have issues or problems that are not dealt with, that will have a negative effect on the project. It will create frustration. The people will lose trust in the project, in its execution, and the team. We had some issues in some company I was working with. There were a lot of issues going on. They opened a kind of issue management system, but it was overflooded so quickly that basically nothing worked anymore. And that's also not good because you have to address the issues in a proper way, communicate with the people. Now, when the sponsor, the customer, the stakeholders identify issues and they address them to the team, they expect that actions will be taken to address them. So somebody has to be responsible to take into account all the issues that we have and that we have to deal with. Now, many issues and problems may occur, and everything has to be traceable. It's very important that all the elements, all the issues that are reported, that we can trace them to see what is going on, what is the status, is somebody dealing with it, and who is that person. We also can identify different types of meeting, and it's very important to understand how to deal with those meetings. Now, we can have a lot of types, and typically in project management, we have following meetings. Project kickoff meeting, where you will present the project to all the people involved. Very important to say, hey, we have a meeting here, we have a project. What is going on? What are we doing? When you will be working with us, we identify the people who will be working together. So you create a start for the project. Project status meetings typically held every week, and the goal is on status. It's not about technical issues. You have to address what is going on with the project, what has been completed, what will be done, and what are the different issues that have to be evaluated. If you have technical issues, you can assign a person to deal with it and report to you when they have a result. So you don't use the time of the status meetings for these, let's say, discussions that maybe only one or two people are interested in. You assign it to somebody else. Risk management meetings, well, when we have a large program or a project and there is a very important risk management that is necessary, you may have separate risk management meetings where the risk manager or the person responsible for risk in the project will meet with people to discuss risk. The result of this meeting will also be presented on the status meetings. There are review meetings where you review the project and the plan. There may be information sharing meetings where you bring the people together to share information. There may be change management, and what is also important, there may be technical meetings. Now, change management meetings, the results of them will be also summarized on the project status meetings. And the technical meetings, it's typical when you have people getting a lot of information. You have technical issues to discuss, issues that may have been identified on the project status meetings. They will be dealt with in the technical meeting. So only the people who, in fact, are dealing with that issue will be on the meeting. You don't want to have everybody there. You may have some in emergency meetings, but then it's also very important to understand that not everybody should be there. Only the people who are really necessary on the meeting should be on the meeting. And sometimes a project manager has a problem. They don't really know what's happening. So they just call in everybody, which is really not what you should do. Now, why do meetings fail? Well, first of all, when we don't have clear expectations, the participants are not actively participating, they're not applying effective listening skills, missing meeting agenda, objectives, and meeting reports, no follow-up on the different issues, participants not chosen wisely, like I said, you just invite everybody, bad timing, missing proper meeting management, conflicts are not managed properly, and not inviting the people on time, or if you forget to send different reminders to the people. So there are a lot of elements we can do. There are courses about meetings, very interesting examples, how you can improve meetings, what you should do. We cannot do that here. We don't have the time, but you can learn about meeting skills. There is also, when we look at meeting, what we call the thinking the hat patterns. We have the red hat, typically a person who uses emotions to deal with issues, problems, and concern, is subjective and choices on value. A white hat looks at facts and data, stresses objectivity and independence. The yellow hat looks at the positive, looks at advantages, takes a constructive approach. You have the black hat, the negative approach, reasons against something, not finding reasons to do something, but finding reasons not to do it. The green hat, not limited to what we call the proverbial box. Like I said before, I don't like thinking out of the box. I think I prefer thinking without a box. But the green hats are typically the people who consider different alternatives. Be careful with the color green, because in some cultures, the green hat may mean something rather negative. When we have the blue hat, dark blue in this case, those people look at organization and content, and they place importance on discipline and logical sequence. Now, the last thing in this video is about the war room. We know about the war room. We've seen it in World War II, when Winston Churchill was bringing all the people together to manage the war effort. Now, everybody in the war room is in fact together. They have all the necessary people. It's an element of co-location where all the information is brought together and then shared with the people who have to use that information, in this case, to manage the war effort. Now, when we have a project, typically we also call it the war room, because the people are coming together You collocate the people when you want to talk about a project, and a war room can be virtual, can be a physical room where you have all the people together who are important for the project. You can have video conferencing today, a lot of different techniques than what used to be in the past. Now that was it for the second video. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the third video. Thank you and bye bye.